Good evening and a very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. I'm Shalini Verma. An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. These words by Mahatma Gandhi condemn violence in the name of primitive revenge. At a time when the Home Ministry has specifically written to the Prime President asking him to reject Ajmal Kasab's mercy petition, a fresh debate on the capital punishment is on. Those who oppose it question whether a person charged for committing a heinous crime meets justice by being sentenced to death or being ostracized and condemned in a jail. At the same time, it is understood that no civil society can show leniency to a person who has committed such a heinous crime. Banned in over 130 countries the world over, the case against death penalty has automatically weakened. But how long before that is done in India? And joining me on the panel today is the Senior Assistant Editor with the Indian Express, Mr. Manish Chibbar, Mr. Arun Bhagat, who is a former Director with the IB, and Professor C. Raj Kumar, who is the Vice Chancellor of the OP Jindal University, also an expert on international law. Welcome to the program, all of you. Let's start the analysis with you, Manish. I wrote, in fact, read your piece today in the Indian Express, which talks about lifting the veil on mercy petitions. Of course, a lot has to be said about the pending petitions and the state in which our country is, because we seem to be very unclear when it comes to giving death penalty to the people or not. How do you really assess that?
You know, the Constitution gives the President the right to, the power to decide mercy petitions, obviously on the advice of the Home Ministry. But it's such a difficult situation to be in the sense nobody knows how the process, what is the process involved, how and who decides whether a person deserves mercy. There have been cases in the past, and I'm sure there will be cases in the future also, where the Home Ministry first decided that a person did not deserve mercy, later on only to change its recommendation. So all this is so very opaque, and there have been demands in the past that it needs to be more transparent. Number one. Number two, there are also a lot of people who argue
the precise reasons why we are discussing that to what extent the presidential powers of pardon could be, let's say, arbitrarily used, is the reason why death penalty has always been a problem all over the world. I mean, if you look at the history of imposition of death penalty, time and again courts have come into this dilemma, a predicament, that how do we really differentiate between what constitutes heinousness, to what extent we can determine heinousness by individuals. At the end of the day, it's a subjective decision that is being taken by the court, or in this context, the President's office. So essentially, this is precisely why we just cannot impose is making it an arbitrary form of punishment. And that is why, if you look at the growth and trends of countries moving from imposing death penalty, in 1977, you had 16 countries which were abolitionist. And 35 years from 1977, in 2012, you have 97 countries which have abolished death penalty. And by the way, these countries are not just the developed countries in Europe. You have countries in Latin America, you have countries in Africa, which have determined that this doesn't work. And of course, academic studies have shown time and again that deterrence as a form of punishment is noted that the Supreme Court, in its judgment, talks about indoctrination. It talks about indoctrination of this person in the process of committing crime. And then later talks about the fact that he doesn't show remorsefulness. Now, here again, there have been enough academic studies and researches, empirical, which shows that remorsefulness is a very difficult thing to assess. It's entirely possible that this person who was anyways willing to kill himself at the time of committing these, heinous crimes could...
Crimes. When it comes to a terrorist and terrorist of like Ajmal Kasab, we can choose to ignore the issue of human rights. Would you agree with that, or how?
So, when did this happen? Mumbai, 2008. When did the Parliament attack take place? Many years before that. Yeah. So why is by those standards, Afzal Guru should have been already hung. Secondly, and more importantly, I'm not against. I support all kinds of punishments for terrorists. I've covered terrorism, so I know what these people can do. But having said that, so my very basic question is, there's a case in which 4 people in Punjab, they butchered 17 people. They used automatic weapons. Those 4 people, they were spared. So were the lives of those 17 people who were killed in that Amritsar marriage, they had come to attend a marriage and they were butchered. So were their lives lesser than those of the people killed in Mumbai? There's a young, entire family of 5. The daughter is raped in front of her parents. All of them are killed. Her younger brother is thrown into the fire. He dies. He's burnt. And the president lets go of the killers. Rapists. Are their crimes lesser than that of the crimes being committed by these people? There's another instance. A person, he first committed a murder, then he commits one more murder and he's let off. While on bail, he commits another murder. So my very basic thing is that, either you have death penalty or you don't. I'm not going into that debate at all. Only time will tell, and there are a lot of groups which are working towards that. But my very simple issue is that once the courts have decided that this person does not deserve leniency.
Moratorium on death penalty on, in fact, and this was the third since 2007, but about 107 countries out of 192 UN members voted in favor of the resolution. And here India voted against the moratorium along with China, US, Iran and Saudi Arabia. We'll take a very short break here and we look into the other facts from today's discussion on capital punishment. Arguments are forwarded by supporters of and those who are against capital punishment. And one of the important things that is generally said is that this kind of a punishment deters a person from committing, deters in fact others from committing such kind of crimes. Sir, is that the case, Mr. Arun Bhagat?
Yes, yes. In your field work, you come across many such cases, and people admit very openly that yes, he wanted to commit this crime, but he was deterred by the fear of getting caught. So to say that it doesn't act as a deterrent, I don't think would be absolutely correct. Surely, even if one person is deterred, say out of 10,000 even, and 5 lives or 10 lives are saved, I think it's worth it.
Manish?
Yeah, I agree with him. All punishments, they have a deterring effect, and death penalty more so, because everybody understands that the punishment is maximum, that is death, or if not death, then at least life, and that to life without parole. So I think it has a huge deterring effect.
Would you agree with that?
Well, frankly, the empirical evidence around the world, not just here, around the world. I mean, you look at Europe. I mean, Europe has abolished death penalty and crime rates have come down. You look at US, where there have been death penalty imposed, and the states in which death penalty is there in the statute, crimes have not reduced, and if at all, there is more crimes. So the empirical evidence not around the world clearly shows one thing, which is death penalty as a particular form of punishment for the crimes is not a deterrent. However, the certainty of punishment, that for example a person is reasonably sure that a punishment will be given to this person, that's a much greater deterrent. So in many ways, one of the problems that we face in our Indian legal system is the extraordinary delays.
Persons on the death row are generally from the economically, socially weaker sections of the society. These were in fact the last lines of Dhananjay Chatterjee too, that had I not been from the background that I really belong to, I would have also been spared by this country. But would you really agree with that? Is that one of the important factors?
Absolutely. Again, you look at all the people who have been in that situation. The vulnerability of the poor, the marginalized, is always the case when it comes to these forms of punishment. In fact, in the US context, we've had history of blacks in particular being at the receiving end when it comes to the imposition of death penalty. But the point is the inability of these people to be able to advent of DNA evidence. There are so many cases in which the courts have done wrong. Imagine judges, and we have evidence in this country.
We have evidence in this country.
I mean, the irreversibility of death penalty. So if somebody is languishing in jail, you put that person wrongly, after 20 years you realize it, we have had that problem, we can release it. But imagine you have killed somebody. the irreversibility.
But Mr. Bhagat, what would you like to say about the criminal justice system, the entire delivery system there? Because, you know, Dhananjay Chatterjee, let's take his example. The crime was committed by him in 1990. He was hanged in 2004 after 14 years. You know, this huge gap, and time and again we keep talking about justice delayed is justice denied. How can you really think of, let's say, having capital punishment in a country where the entire justice, the judicial system seems to be very crippled?
Well, crippled, I think it is dysfunctional now. And unfortunately, we are not doing enough to see that it functions properly at all the tiers that exist in the system, as well as in the different departments which are there. There's, I mean, the defense, the prosecution, the police, the forensic, all of them have a big part to play. And I'm afraid nowhere can you give them even 50% marks.
You do. But anyway, we'll certainly have to address all these issues when it comes to something like death penalty. But as I started, sir, we swear by Gandhian principles where we say that an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. We'll certainly have to stick to that aspect too. We'll continue the discussion. Time for a very short break. Stay tuned. And our toll-free lines are now open for you. The number is 1-800-115313. Well, the moment we talk about deterrence, whether people who are punished, who are rewarded that sentence, does it really deter other people from committing crime? At the same time, there is a group of people who would certainly believe that every criminal must be given a chance to reform. Now, I would like to start it with you, Professor Rajkumar. What should be exactly the idea behind when we say that every citizen, every such criminal must be given a chance to reform? There have been ideas like compensate the victim's family and with their income from the employment or the community service, and by doing so the criminal pays back to the society as also to the victim and the victim's family. Now this seems very positive and it seems very humane too, but is it really practical?
Well, there are several ways to respond to that. One is that we, unfortunately, in our country, victimology and victim justice perspectives have not been adequately infused into the criminal justice system. The entire focus of the criminal justice system, right from the commission of crime to the conviction, is on the accused and not on the victim. So there is a case for clearly expanding the right to victim assistance program, not only with regard to the compensation essentially by the accused or the person convicted of the offense, but more importantly state, because crime is an offense against the state. So there is a duty and responsibility on the part of the state as well to come forward in creating compensatory mechanisms. There are provisions in the Criminal Procedure Code which provides for it, but they are marginal in nature. But the earlier question which you asked about the objective of punishment is, I do believe that deterrence is an important object of punishment. Reformation and rehabilitation is an important object of punishment, because essentially now we, not just sociologists, but there is a consensus that crime is not a born phenomenon. You're not a born criminal here, and society contributes to some extent in the process of a person becoming a criminal. Then it is entirely possible that society has a duty and an obligation to.
The question is that despite the death penalty being awarded to so many people, still there is a report that crimes are committed. So what is the guarantee that if a person who is awarded or is to be awarded death penalty will not commit a crime?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Now, what is the guarantee that if a person is awarded death penalty, it will certainly deter other people? At the same time, it will, the person won't commit a crime. He's just making a point here. Manish?
Yeah. Basically, I think the first question has already been answered by Mr. Bhagat in that the deterrence is that even if a single person who's who's thinking of committing murder, and because of the punishment that it comes with, he does not do it, so that means a life saved. So that is the deterrence part. As far as the second part, that if you leave somebody out and if you pardon somebody, and what if he goes out and does the crime again?
Yeah.
So there are two answers to this. Number one, that if a person is pardoned in
if we don't have any these severe punishment punishment for for these crimes. So how we can reform the people? How we can reform the people if there is no deterrent? No severe punishment.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I think, Professor Rajkumar, we are coming to the same point, but still, we'll take your views on this.
Well, so the thing is that clearly the death penalty is a particular form of punishment, but when you put somebody in prison for heinous acts and for long periods of time, there are few greater punishments than curtailing your freedom and actually spending time in jail. I mean, we can't even imagine to be curtail our freedom for a short while, and imagine people spending years and years in jail. So one of the alternatives which many countries have pursued is that if we need to move in the direction of abolishing death penalty and yet fulfill the objective which you just mentioned, then one thing that is worth considering is, can we talk of a life without parole, as in a life
I just want to say one thing. If somebody committing crime for his benefit by nature should be punished, but if someone is a criminal because of a social or a bad life, should give more chances to be him or her a good citizen.
Right. Thank you very much for that point. But Mr. Bhagat, it's really very difficult again. We are coming back to the same old point. Professor Rajkumar talked about sentencing guidelines. Can we have something like that in our country? Can we have a clear demarcation as to these kinds of crimes will certainly be, it will end into death penalty for the criminal, and other crimes would lead to some sort of life imprisonment?
I don't know whether it is possible, because for every specific crime there is a term of imprisonment, type of imprisonment, which is designated in our penal code. And
we are joined by a caller right now from Chennai, Yuvraj. Please put your question, Yuvraj.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes.
My question is, if you just ban death penalty, and what do you think, like in case of the family members of the victim, if they see them going scot-free, what kind of feelings do they have, to see their, the person who has committed the heinous crime is walking scot-free, if you just leave them like that or give them life sentence. What do you think the relatives will feel, in case if they see them living, whereas their beloved ones are no more? So don't you think like it's right on a part to just allow them live like that? Do you think it's... I just want to ask this clarification.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yuvraj, for that question. We'll take a very short break and we'll come back on that particular point that Yuvraj has raised. Please take a short break here. So more than 2/3 of the countries of the world have abolished the death penalty in law or in practice, and most of these countries which have abolished the death sentence are in the Western world, while over 60% of the world's population still lives in a country where death sentence is still legal, a country like ours. What would you like to say about the caller, the question that he asked?
Basically his question is that, what about the rights of the kin of the victims? So, let me ask you a question, and this is a real case that I'm talking about. There was a man who was murdered. The killer, he was caught. So while even as the trial was on, the man's wife, she also died because of a heart attack. He had a young son who committed suicide, and then his daughter, who was engaged to be married, the marriage broke. So this man who committed the murder, he was let off. So he did not destroy just one person. He did not kill one person. He effectively killed 3, and this man is out.
And a full generation.
Yeah, and a full generation. So it's all very. It's easy for everybody to say that these people also deserve, the killers also deserve mercy. But my point is, what about the rights of the victims and their kin? If you murder 17 people, or if you rape and kill a 6-year-old girl, what about her?
What will be the people like loksabha, on those government is spending lot of IT pays money, up to which time we will be paying this money?
Okay, so this is one set of people who believe that it's more humane than life imprisonment, it's more economical than life imprisonment. Hang them, at least, you'll be spared.
दंड बनाते हैं जिनसे लोग डरे और मैम ये जो अपन ये आतंकवादी हैं अफजल गुरु ये कसाब वगैरह तो मैम जो ये पार्टीज हैं ये वोट बैंक की राजनीति करती हैं तो क्यों नहीं ये अधिकार राष्ट्रपति से छीनकर संसद खुद ले कि वो किसे मृत्युदंड देगी और किसे माफी देगी.
Thank you very much for that point, Purnendu Sharma. Well, people may have different opinions on this.
Yes, we have to go to the basics, which is that let us not condone any form of brutality, be it terrorist acts or other forms of crimes that we are discussing. But the fundamental point in relation to debates about death penalty all over the world is, given the fact that the imposition of death penalty is an inherently arbitrary decision which is going to be made by courts or individuals, the propensity to exercise that power in an arbitrary way is very high. And we have enough evidence, as I mentioned, around the world that those decisions are proved to be wrong. Secondly, the global thinking around the world, developed and developing countries, has shown that societies and views of societies have changed. What they thought that...
That is also one of the problems, sir. Since you were talking about the operating conditions, do you think that, all these things can get streamlined, we can get a clarity only if we introduce reforms in police, we introduce reforms in the judiciary?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean that is should be the order of the day, really. And unfortunately, a lot of lip service is being given to it. But practically, we are doing nothing.